Hey there. Welcome to another episode of This Week in Pharmacy. My name is TWIRx. I'm the founder of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. If you're listening and you're not watching on YouTube, I just want to let you know you can go back to YouTube. You can pick up the episode. It's a visual episode. We're going to be going through some slides and sharing with you some of our insights as podcasters, because I have other experts and podcasters here with me. Actually, I call them the podcast power couple because of how tool enabled and how detailed these two people are. They're incredible. If you did not get to listen to last week's TWIRx, all about improving and building a podcast for success, especially dialed into pharmacists and providers, nurses, physicians, please go back and look. We will have these on the Pharmacy Podcast visual site. We're also going to share this on a blog that's going to be upcoming. It's going to wrap up all 3 episodes. You'll be able to have all 3 episodes all in one place. But without further ado, I want to welcome back, I said the podcast power couple. It's a tongue twister, ANISHA and SUNJAY.
I love that.
You guys have really come up with some amazing ways of simplifying podcasting. Podcasting's been out since 2006. I got into it in 2009, didn't know what I was doing, wasn't very good at it until probably about 2010, 2012-ish. And now it's all the rage. And in my opinion, as someone who serves some of the most intelligent people I've ever met in my life, which are pharmacists, if you're a pharmacist and you're going to start a podcast, you have to level up. You have to go beyond the average Joe show and really be ready to produce something that is of high quality. And ANISHA, that's why I'm so glad that you're here, because you are a pharmacist, you are a podcaster, and I know you have the SUNJAY cheat code that he can do a lot of the work for you. But still, give us just an opening for today's TWIRx.
Oh, I'm so looking forward to this because I'm really excited to share a little bit more detail behind the scenes of what I've been doing for the last 4 years as a podcaster, nearly 5 years, nearly half a decade. That's really exciting. And I've learned so much on that journey from SUNJAY. So I'm not as, tech immature as I was early on. In fact, I've been writing my email newsletters to my audience, and I'm doing the tech ones. Can you believe? SUNJAY might be surprised.
SUNJAY, you are just a nerdy techie guy that just gets it, and you know how more than I've dealt with a lot of brilliant technological engineers, people that develop software. Something that some of those people don't have that you have is you have this smooth application to know how to make something look good, sound good, and just roll off. And I've watched you live in some of the things that ANISHA's done, where she shows up at an organization that she's being compensated to do content development, and you're in the background making things so smooth and so well. So I just like the combo of the two of you.
Thank you, Todd. People used to call me, well, actually ANISHA used to call me OCD when I would, obsess about positioning of speakers in the living room and cables showing, and then that kind of translated to podcast episode editing and this font is not right and the positioning, all those little things, and fast forward to 2024, 25. Stephen Bartlett's made an entire living out of it, talking about 1% gains. And just today I was looking at a post from one of his podcasts, Eddington Team, talking about those 1% gains and how those little things that people don't see, they wouldn't be able to tell you why something looks good, but yeah, and those are the little 1% things. They all add up, don't they? So yeah, and it takes time, so I don't want this to kind of sound like, okay, if you're listening to this, you got to be 100% right off the bat. But wherever you're starting from, just as Anisha has alluded to lots of times, just try to get better week on week, month on month, year on year, and then just those small little incremental gains, just like going to the gym. You know, you're not going to go to the gym and start lifting the heaviest weight. You're not going to try and run a marathon if you've never run before. You're going to start small and you know, look to improve. And I think that's just this. I don't know. It's an obsessive mindset that I've got, and I'm glad I've got it. It's been put to good use.
It has, and I like how last week we were really able to get into some of the startups, some of the simple 1-2 steps of what it is to start a podcast. And this is just video of last week, and it was just its ability to give a pharmacist, in this case, because they're my favorite providers, it gives them a step process of what to do in action so that they know, because these people are, like I said, highly intelligent people. They want things that work. They don't want to really think it, even though they're going to sometimes. Anisha, as a pharmacist yourself, that's why I almost feel like this is evidence-based podcast training, because we've tested it on you. We've tested it on a pharmacist who is thinking of highly regulated. I mean, you keep people from dying based on what a physician, what a general practitioner is doing in prescription. And now you're looking at it and the drug-drug interactions and the intricacies of the individual. And you're kind of saying, hey, we should either lower that dose or this doesn't work for the patient. So when I think of that transferring back into podcasting, it's a good opportunity to guide our providers and our pharmacists to developing strong and good content.
No, I love that. And I've made this comparison before because pharmacists are perfectionists. We love everything to be absolutely perfect when it comes to a patient journey or a patient story. And last week, I talked a little bit about having Stephen Bartlett's new 1% diary and how that's making an impact in my kind of personal life. But I'm molding some of those traits into my professional projects, my podcast work, things that I'm doing at the hospital as well, in terms of my ward work and things like that. But how we can compare podcasting and learning is that when you think about managing a patient, you don't suddenly get them to do 20 things at once. You do ask them to make small changes to their routine, or you're making incremental doses in terms of increasing a blood pressure medication, or you make a small decrease in terms of their pain medication when they've become sort of post-op, and you're reducing their therapy, and you're making these small changes. And you have to take what you kind of implement into practice at work and apply that into podcasting as well, because there is so much to understand when it comes to the development, the design of the podcast. How do you prepare yourself? The audio, if you're doing video, what platforms there are, how do you market that? The production, it's absolutely huge. And part of why Sunjay and I are so excited about helping people with it is because it's taken me nearly sort of 5 years to get to the point where I'm at today. But I think we could easily create a 4 to 6 week course and chunk it down and get people to start their podcasts in such a small amount of time and be really successful from the get-go and kind of learn from the mistakes that we've made, the problems that we faced. And you do have that amazing combination of having the pharmacist's background, and then you've got the tech savvy guru and the genius behind all the production and the sound, and that kind of 2 peas in a pod is a perfect combination, I think. And that's what really excites me. And everyone always asks me, like, how can you work with your husband? But actually I feel like it's bringing us closer together because we have this project that we have in common, and we're both learning on the journey from different aspects. And he gets to learn so much about pharmacy and my career and my passions, while I also get to learn so much about things that he genuinely loves as a hobby, and now he's obviously doing it as a full-time job. So yeah, it's a win-win.
Well, I have to give you credit because not all husband and wife couples can work together. It takes a very special combination and personalities of sorts, and it's just someone who loves marriage and has been every time I'm on Facebook and I see someone post something about their husband or their wife, I'm constantly supporting them in raising each other up, because that trickles down into how that affects your family and how it affects your life and how much you need each other to get you through how hard life can be. So the way that you guys support each other is just amazing. And I love watching it. And I love seeing you guys grow together. You know, you have a entire environment out on LinkedIn. I absolutely freaking love LinkedIn. I've used LinkedIn for, my gosh, it's making me feel old, but I think it's almost 20 years. So it's crazy.
Whoa.
And you have an environment out there called Behind the Mic. Go to ANISHA Patel's profile first. It's easier to find it that way. And then go and find Behind the Mic. And it's a newsletter that is a backstage pass to all things podcasting. And you had a recent post this week that came out called The Great Debate. And this is where before we give some of the slides that we're going to go through today, I want to talk about this because you guys really brought up a really good debate. And that is, so I guess I'm an OG podcaster, someone that started way back, 3 years after the RSS feed was even invented. I picked it up and I started doing it very badly, started calling an 800 number through podcast, or what was it called? Blog Talk Radio. I don't even know if they're in business anymore. So Blog Talk Radio said, here, for $6 or $7 a month, you dial an 800 number, you give the 800 number to your guest, you both dial in, and you basically, it sounded like you're talking through a styrofoam cup together. It sounded horrible, but that was the beginnings for me for podcasting. And of course that all evolved. But the old school podcaster and the old school podcast listener was all audio. It was all about the audio. It was all about, that was it. And then all of a sudden, when YouTube kind of was evolving and other things were evolving, we're creatures that are following everything and anything that's now built into tech and our screens. Sometimes we have too much screens in our lives. But then the element of vodcasting came out. So that was video in podcasting, and how now video can be a part of podcasts. And in my personal opinion, it has to happen, because when we're I'm developing content through the Pharmacy Podcast Network for clients that are amazing, some pharmaceutical companies, some technology companies, some consultant companies. So I want to give them as much as I can give them. So when I'm recording a podcast, I'd say about 8 out of 10 times, I'm recording the video with the audio. And then because I don't have a SUNJAY on my team, I'm not able to marry you, SUNJAY. You're just not my type. But if I could have him doing all my video editing, which I think is a lot more difficult, in my opinion, than just audio, then you could deliver a well polished video and audio at the same time. So Pharmacy Podcast Network does have a lot of video out on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube now, obviously it's on YouTube. But talk to me about this debate, and talk to me about kind of some of your opinions of the difference between video and audio podcasting.
Shall I hand it over to SUNJAY to start?
Yeah,
because this is his jam.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right, Todd. Podcasting is an audio first medium, always has been. It still is. So let's be clear on that. If you look at the data, people still the majority of people still listen to podcasts. But we're living in an age now, and you mentioned it, screens are everywhere. We've all got these things in our pockets. We've got them in our homes. We've got them in our offices. We've got them in our cars now as well. And, video video killed the radio star. And there's a song as the song goes, and I said it in the post earlier this week. It's happening again, right? Because video is taking over podcasting, and there's no getting away from it. So yes, video, yes, podcast is audio. Yes, audio is easier. Now, for a long time, when I was talking to people about starting podcasts and how should I start, I always said, just do the audio. Just start with the audio. It makes it simple, makes it easy. I have changed my stance on that. I've gone 360 or 180 on that completely to say, you might as well switch the video camera on. We've all got one, right? We've all got a webcam. We've all got a mobile phone. So whether you use it or not, this is the thing, right? Whether you use it or not, switch it on and record the video, because there is no getting away from the fact that video is getting bigger. And if you really want to scale, if you really want to grow, you know, videos, it's all video. Now, I know there's obviously a lot of controversy at the moment with TikTok being banned in the US and all of this stuff, but, you know, there's still lots of other platforms. Instagram have gone fully behind video, you know. YouTube is a video-only platform. Spotify have massively gone after video podcasts. They had obviously the famous deal where they signed the Joe Rogan podcast for, you know, in excess of 100 million, as it was reported at the time. They've paid for a lot of other podcasts, and they want the video. There are more and more podcasts. On that article that Anisha wrote, there was some data on, you know, how many video podcasts and how they've grown. And, you know, with any of these things, you'll see that the first few years of the growth, it's slow, then suddenly we see an uptick. Well, that uptick was 2024. There was a huge surge of video podcasts on there. LinkedIn, you know, you mentioned LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn as well. It's my favorite platform. It's our favorite platform, and we live on there most of the time. So people listening, go and connect with us on LinkedIn. That's where we're going to be. They've recently released a vertical video feed. You know, they're going after the TikToks and the Instagrams of this world. So if you're not getting your video out there and you're not getting your face out there, then, you know, I'm not saying your podcast can't grow. Of course it can, but you really want to be getting out there. And, you know, a lot of businesses now, pharmacists, we're talking about medical professionals here, they want to, whether they're sharing information or whether they're going on an entrepreneurial journey, you know, it's about building trust. You know, we ultimately want to build trust with our audience, and people trust you if they can see you, right? If people came to a pharmacy and you were just, you know, it was like when you go to confession and you don't see the person behind the thing, and there's just a little slot, and you just get your medications, and that's how you're communicating. You wouldn't trust that person. You wouldn't trust a doctor who operates like that. So I would say it's the same when you're delivering content via a podcast. Get your face out there. And even if you're not posting the actual video itself, you can repurpose that, right? You can turn that video into short form content for clips, for marketing, for lots of different reasons for your website. So I think, you know, it's time to embrace video. And also it's a practice, right? There's a lot of people who, and Anisha won't mind me saying this, you know, when you're behind the mic and there's no camera on, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's easier. But the camera switches on, and all of a sudden, there's a different element to it. There's a different style to it. And if you're not used to that from day one, then, you know, that change will be noticed when you eventually do switch the camera on. So get comfortable in front of the camera. You know, it's all we're heading into that world of video. So the sooner you can get comfortable with that, the better you're going to get. And as with everything, it will take time, but just start now. Get the video on, use whatever you've got. We'll get into the gear, and we're going to talk a little bit about that this week. But yeah, just turn the camera on.
Sunjay, is taking your video podcast onto Spotify. I'm showing on the screen right now the Pharmacy Podcast Network's environment on Spotify. We've never put video on Spotify, but we have video available for probably, like I said, 8 out of 10 of the podcasts that we publish. So how easy is it? Is it something that I have to do as a separate push? So for example, if I go into my Podbean hosting application, I can hit the publish button and publish out to every single directory that we're on. I think we're on over 30 or 40 directories out there, ones that I've sometimes not even heard of. Our technician Brady keeps adding the RSS feeds that are out there. But how easy is it to publish video on Spotify?
It's super easy. So once upon a time, you actually had to be hosted. So you're using Podbean. You would have to use Spotify as your host in order to get video on there. They have now changed that because, of course, like I said, they want to go after video big time. They're going after YouTube. They want to be the YouTube. They want to be the place to go for video podcasts. So now anyone, regardless of where you're hosting your podcast, can put their video episode on to Spotify. So what you would need to do is you'd go onto Spotify for Creators, as it's called now. You sign up with a free account, or you log in with your Spotify account if you have one, which I know a majority of people do. And there you just enter your podcast details, your RSS feed, and it will just populate your page with all of your episodes. And there's literally just 3 dots that you click and you say upload video. And so it's a manual process. If you've got like hundreds of episodes, yes, it's a little bit of a tedious and a manual process to get there. And it is an extra step. So you would still go to Podbean and publish your audio, and then you would have to go to YouTube, and then you'd have to go to Spotify to then upload your video. But it's possible now, and that wasn't possible before. So yes, there's a little bit of extra work involved. I think it's worth it. It's only a matter of time where there's a Podbean equivalent for video podcasts. And in fact, I just saw that today. Again, it's Stephen Bartlett. His Flight Studio company have created a product where you can just upload your video once and it will send it to Spotify. It will send it to YouTube. It will send it to whichever other video platforms are out there. So again, it's very early days, but that's going to grow and grow. So yeah, it's very easy to get your video out there. It's not that difficult at all.
I have to look into it and definitely want to do it. So from the Pharmacist Diaries, Anisha, tell me about when you start doing analytics and you're starting to see where is your listener listening to you? What's the #1 outlet right now for Pharmacist Diaries?
You read my mind. That's exactly what I wanted to talk about, because when Sanjay's really clearly put across that it's really good to get comfortable with video, and I completely agree. I started off as audio only, and I do believe in taking baby steps. So it was, let's kind of master audio, get really good with audio only podcasting, and then we'll kind of move on to video afterwards, which we did quite quickly. But when I wanted to then transition to solo episodes of my own, there was welcome back to a barrier between me and the camera. And Sanjay shared a few photos actually, which have been really funny, of me just freaking out. And I look like, and I sound like a robot, genuinely. I just don't sound like myself. And it has been a major struggle, but it's one that I've been working through over the last few years. And there's a significant difference now in how I am on camera compared to, 2 years ago. But the other thing to think about is obviously you as an individual and you as a podcaster and what you want and what you can achieve, or what you think you can achieve, or what you've got the confidence to do is one thing, but you have to consider your audience all the time, because at the end of the day, the audience are the most important and valuable asset to the podcast. They're the ones who, download those episodes, watch the content, tune into the podcast as well. And what I've discovered, going back to your point, is that obviously I had incredible audio stats in terms of my downloads and, number of downloads per episode, like what countries are tuning in. You get age groups, so I could see like, okay, well, originally lots of older, more experienced pharmacists were listening, but now you can see the tables have completely turned. So it's normally pharmacists who are new graduates and students. But what I've noticed over the last maybe year or year and a half is that my audio stats have decreased, but my video stats, when you look at YouTube, have tripled. And now I know that a lot of the younger generation, and also more males versus females, my audio is mainly female driven, and pharmacy is pretty much female driven. So about 70% of my population are females. But when you look at my YouTube stats, it's so many more males listening in or watching to the content, which is just a really big shift. And now I'm just trying to get really comfortable with the video side of things.
You both do such an amazing job putting this together. We're showing on the screen now. If you're driving, if you're walking, if you're just listening to just the audio, don't worry about it. We'll have a link in the show notes to take you to the Pharmacist Diaries YouTube page. But it just looks so professional. It's laid out so well. All of the people that you've linked in with, many of these are part of the Pharmacy Podcast Network, which is so cool. But your video is just great, and it's something that I watch. I kind of bounce between your audio and your video when I listen to Pharmacist Diaries, and it's kind of a good blueprint for people that are wanting to start their own. You definitely connect with Anisha and Sunjay on LinkedIn, but also search Pharmacist Diaries on YouTube and take a listen and watch the videos that that ANISHA has published and put out there. And like I said, there's 177 episodes now or something?
171.
171. Wow. Yeah, it's just the impact, the professionalism, the difference. I see sometimes your studio keeps changing, the looks that you have. I love that. I think that variety is so important to audiences as well. But let's talk about our next steps. So last time that we were here, we were kind of talking about the beginning steps, and it was important just to kind of get started and introduce you both to kind of this whole series of what we're talking about and building a trusted and well done podcast. But what are we going to review today?
Well, I wanted to do a little bit of a recap in terms of the actual podcast idea and share a little bit more detailed, a bit of a deep dive in terms of starting your podcast, because the idea is the first thing that comes to mind, right? And that is figuring that out in terms of the details as to the topic that you want to talk about. I shared a little bit about why Pharmacist Diaries and the idea came into place, and that was because I was teaching pharmacy students, and I identified that there was a gap in the market in terms of a lack of information through Google or YouTube or podcasting, where there wasn't enough information for students to understand all the different career pathways. And as that's evolving and getting so much wider, I wanted to be able to educate students in a format that they like. And a lot of young people are glued to their phones, and obviously a podcast came to mind. And part of my personality is extremely sort of extrovert, love having conversations, really like that kind of like deep dive curiosity into people's lives out of just genuine interest. And the two things really married well together. I was able to showcase our profession. I'm able to educate and inspire people and motivate them in their pharmacy career, teach them about all the different types of transitions that they can have. They don't have to stay in one sector of pharmacy. They can move into all these different places. I've got this really fortunate experience of living abroad and working as a pharmacist and sharing that story and sharing more about me. And that all comes back to sort of like building your personal brand as a pharmacist. As we build what we're doing as specialist pharmacists, as an example, through LinkedIn, you could also build a personal brand as a side hustle, through a podcast, and showcase and kind of become a thought leader in an area of expertise, which is so cool. And I kind of thought about the whole, topic, am I going to have enough content to talk about this for years and years and years? Am I going to be able to find enough people to interview, or would I prefer to do kind of like solo episodes? But actually for me, interviewing people is just so much more fun, and I really enjoy that kind of dynamic. So when you're thinking about your idea, you have to think about whether or not you're really passionate about that topic, whether you've got enough knowledge to share with the world on that topic, whether you actually love talking about it, because if you're going to go for the long haul, you want to be able to talk about that topic all the time and not get bored as well. And part of that kind of research is actually looking to see what else is already out there. So I started looking at other podcast, platforms, and typing in certain titles like pharmacist or pharmacy or pharmacy student, and literally hardly anything was coming up except Pharmacy Podcast Network was there. There was a Scottish pharmacist who had a really good podcast called Pharmacy in Practice. And there was one or two other podcasts that had kind of started, but then they only had a sort of 10, 20 episodes and then stopped doing it. But I did notice a larger number of podcasts in the US, but there was literally nothing in the UK. So that was really exciting for me. It was like, oh wow, there's literally nothing here. This is the start of something really cool and exciting. And Sunjay had started his podcast a few months prior to that. So I was really fortunate again to have his insight and expertise and guidance along that journey. And my target audience is pretty easy. They are pharmacists, but I also included pharmacy students or those interns who are looking for that inspiration. So when you are researching your topic, make sure that you're considering who your target audience is. And part of that research is actually looking to see where those individuals hang out. Are they on social media, and which social media platforms are they using? Do they chat a lot in kind of like groups or forums where they ask a lot of questions? And find out if they're asking any questions or identifying any problems that relate to the podcast topic that you want to create, and whether or not you personally can solve that problem by creating a podcast in that very topic. And I obviously had students right in front of me every single day teaching. And from their kind of feedback and as market research, I already identified that they were struggling. They were actively asking me, how do we figure out what we're supposed to do? What opportunities are there outside of retail pharmacy, hospital pharmacy, and going into the industry? What can you do within those career pathways? How do you get into industry? If I want to do community for a couple of years, can I move to hospital? Like, what are my chances? All of these questions were coming up. So I just had this massive list of questions to answer. So when you're looking at your podcast idea, really dive deep into the audience and try and figure out what those problems are. Now, if you already have a social media presence like I do on LinkedIn, use your polls. Ask your audience who actually follow you at the moment whether or not they have problems that you can solve, whether or not they have obstacles that they're running into that you could potentially resolve using an audio or video medium. If you're reaching out to patients, say, for example, you're an HIV specialist pharmacist and you've got all these patients that you see, and you've only got sort of 7 to 10 minutes to have a consultation with them, and you really wish that you could dive deeper into the drugs that they use, the side effects, some of the sort of more unique aspects of HIV care that may not come up in kind of general conversation during your clinic, but things that you want them to learn about in general. Is this something that you could create a podcast for, that you're doing it for your clients and the people who see you in clinic, but just think this podcast goes out on a on a global scale, and there's going to be all these patients from everywhere in the world who are going to find your content. And that is just so exciting, because I did not know that this many people would find me. I did not know that within a year, 125 countries would be tuning into the podcast. Like, that for me was mind blowing. But it's so exciting because I started connecting with all these amazing pharmacists from all over the globe. And it just helped me to just realize that, hey, this podcast is way bigger than just what's happening in the UK. Like, this is my opportunity to show what's happening in pharmacy, like internationally. And when I also think about a podcast idea, you're looking at that sort of like unique angle that you have. And for me, the unique angle was my own personal story. Working in hospital, doing a residency, going and living in Dubai out of love, and doing some crazy kind of trips during my residency and taking extra night shifts so I can go and visit SUNJAY for 4 days on a trip. We had a special love fund where we put like $100 into an account every single month, and whoever had to fly could use that money. And that whole story came out through my podcast journey. Working in Abu Dhabi, working for Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, working for Cleveland Clinic, coming back to the UK, having children, like finding pediatrics, finding education, like that journey and that roadmap is so exciting for the junior, kind of like younger pharmacists to see that the world with pharmacy is your oyster, and you can literally do whatever you want with that. And that was the kind of like baseline for kind of sharing my story. But the kind of unique angle that I think I had that other podcasters may not have or haven't mastered yet is storytelling. I absolutely love the kind of curiosity, the storytelling, asking people the right questions during my interviews to capture really unique information. And this is why people love listening to my podcast while they're on a walk, or when they go for a run, or when they're at the gym, or in the car on their way home from work, because they just enjoy the story element, but they're getting educated and inspired at the same time. And then the other thing when it comes to kind of creating your podcast idea is figuring out a name. probably the hardest thing to do, the most challenging thing, because I had all these ideas. But one of the things I wanted to share, which was really important, is that when you're creating a name for your podcast, make sure that it's easy to spell, easy to pronounce. Go onto social media and start figuring out if those sort of handles are available. So Pharmacist Diaries was not available on Instagram. I had to use Pharmacist Diaries UK, like those kind of things. So start identifying whether or not you can utilize that name to make it easy for people to obviously find you. And when you share your name, it's easy to kind of capture that information. And then I also saved the pharmacistdiaries.com domain as well. So I had access to a website when I wanted to build it. So that was really exciting. And then you kind of need to think about, like, what is your kind of show description? Like, what is your show about? What is it that you're trying to achieve? What is it that you're going to do when it comes to the podcast, whether it's education, is it storytelling, is it that you're motivating people, is it that you're sharing information about medications or different specialist areas within pharmacy. Really try and kind of like create a paragraph description so that you can share that when you kind of get your podcast up and running. And also it will help you to kind of create a trailer for your podcast so that people can listen to that 1-minute teaser so they understand kind of what's coming. And then the last thing really with kind of creating the initial idea is thinking about the branding and what your logo is going to look like, what color schemes you're going to use. This is all the creative side of podcasting, which is the fun side. And I did all of mine through sort of Canva, which is a website that you can create lots of social media posts and presentations and things. I still use Canva to this day. I absolutely love it. But that really helped me to kind of get creative. And then I shared different versions of what I'd created with family and friends and other colleagues, and kind of, came up with the black and white logo that I love so much.
I want to take just a quick break to share my favorite post of the week. This touched me. It came off of LinkedIn, but we have a future podcaster rising. And I just couldn't, I kept watching this over and over again. And this is ANISHA and SUNJAY's daughter. She's just so freaking adorable.
I know, it's too much, Todd. Welcome to Pharmacist Diaries.
But what's funny is, like, I made a comment in there that's like, oh yeah, it'll probably be holograms by then. But who knows what the technology will be like when she's 21 or something like that. Goodness gracious, of how fast it's all going, and artificial intelligence starts getting involved. But it's funny how your children watch you and you don't realize that they're watching you. I've had my Rachel, who's my second born, I've had her on 4 times, and I need to get her on in order to keep that going, because I've watched her grow every time we've brought her on. Her voice sounds different. She obviously looks different. She actually interviewed a pharmacist one time, and she made up her own questions, and it blew me away of how well thought out it was. But what I didn't realize is she pays attention to what I'm doing, and sure enough, kind of copies or emulates kind of what I'm doing. And that's probably why she grabbed the mic and said Pharmacy Podcast Diaries. And it was just so
cute. Do you know what's so beautiful about that video though? Is that I went to a university in that video to go and do a talk to students about Pharmacist Diaries, and also about the podcast and careers and transitions within careers. And she was on her school vacation at the time. And I said, why don't you just come with me for the day? It'll be really fun. We'll take a road trip. And she was like, yes, let's do it. I get to like do when mummy comes, I come to mummy for work for the day. And she handed out like all the booklets, and she like had all the students come in the room and sit down. And then I asked her to get feedback forms. So I printed out all these feedback questions and asked them to fill them out, and she collected them all. And it was just so wonderful to have this whole side of my pharmacy life, which is so different to working in a hospital and being a traditional hospital pharmacist or in academia where I can't take my child to work. And being an entrepreneur and a podcaster, and the entrepreneurial side of me allowed me to take my child to work. Like, it was so much fun. And I love that part of, what I'm building with Pharmacist Diaries, is that I can bring my child wherever I want and she gets to see me like in my element.
I still want to gather some of the children that are in our little circles. A shout out to Jenna Quinn. Dr. Quinn is the leading podcaster on the PPN, all about pediatrics. And her daughter went to the Pennsylvania Pharmacist Association annual meeting and watched her mother do a full, I think it was an hour presentation. And when she came down off the stage, she kind of whispered to her daughter, she goes, "So how'd mommy do?" And her daughter's like, "It was so boring." And I'm just like, well, that's the honesty of children. And I'm like, we need to throw these kids on podcasts together just to get their perspective of pharmacist, pharmacist podcast.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, so I just wanted to summarize sort of like the preparation or the planning stage. But where Sunjay comes in, which is, the expertise part, but, behind all the tech and the audio, is making sure that you get, you prepare yourself from a software setup, like thinking about your recording space, and choosing your kind of podcast hosting platform as well. So maybe we can get Sunjay to dive into that now.
Yeah, I want to also tell them, Sunjay, how to launch your podcast in 30 days, the step-by-step guide that you have up, and wanted to kind of like share that and have you go through that with us.
Yeah, so if you go to, we have a proper website now, which is behindthemic.anishaandsunjay.com. You can grab there, you go, that's the actual guide there. You can grab this 30-day PDF, which is a step-by-step, which is effectively what we're kind of covering in these 3 episodes here on the Pharmacy Podcast Network. And what Anisha's just spoken about kind of takes you up until around about day 8. There's a couple of bits that we have kind of glossed over, which is just the kind of content planning and kind of preparing your episodes in advance, just kind of knowing what you're going to say. But everything's in the guide there. So yeah, feel free to go and download it. It's completely free. Just drop your email address in and you can go and grab that. But week 2, when you're kind of in this 30-day process, is when you want to start thinking about the gear and the kind of the technical side. And I just want to say, I love all the adoration from you, Todd, about my expertise and how I'm the secret weapon. But I also want to say that podcasting is not all technical. It's not all about the tech. And why me and Anisha work so well together is I've learned so much from her about the other side of it, right? The non-technical marketing side, the planning, the kind of the all of this that writes newsletters, email, creating an email newsletter, all of that stuff is something that I am interested in, but I've kind of prioritized my time on the technology. So there's a lot more to it than just the tech. But let's get on to the tech, because for me, I think the number one thing is keeping it simple, right? I think we don't want to, a lot of people, we don't want to start investing large amounts of money from day one. And that's really important. So when it comes to the essential equipment you need, as I've already alluded to, you want to switch the camera on. So just use what you've got. And most of us have got a laptop with a webcam built in. Most of them are terrible. It doesn't matter. Just start with that, right? Use that. But I would highly, highly recommend that the one thing you do invest in is your microphone, right? I think there's as we've already said, podcasting is still an audio first medium, right? It's not even 50-50 right now. So the majority of your people are still going to listen to you. And even if they're watching you, right, it's the people will forgive a poor video quality if they can hear you well. But what they won't forgive is good video. If you could have the best video quality in the world, but if they can't hear you properly, they will switch off. They will not watch or listen to you. So go and invest in a microphone. That's the number one thing I can say you can do. And you can pick one up for as little as, $60, 70, $50. They don't have to be expensive. We've got some suggestions. We've got an Amazon storefront. We've got some suggestions which we can share with people as well. But go and invest in that. Something that's easy to use, something that's going to just project your voice and just make you sound that a little bit more professional than just using the built-in microphone in your laptop. Don't use Bluetooth. Don't use Bluetooth headsets. Bluetooth, wireless is not friendly when it comes to audio, when it comes to syncing, especially when you're using video. I'd rather you just, if you remember, I don't have them with me, but back in the day, when you used to buy your phone, they used to give you a headset with your phone, a wired headset. Yep. That is going to be way better than any Bluetooth headset you'll see. And you'll actually see experts. I've seen experts, very, very wealthy experts, on podcasts using that free headset that they get with the phone. And it's absolutely, it's good enough. And I edit podcasts for a living, and I recommend this to a lot of entrepreneurs who are multi-millionaires. They don't have a microphone, but they've got one of those lying around. Use that. So again, use what you've got. But if you can afford it and if you want to really level up, and you said at the beginning, Todd, pharmacists, healthcare professionals, we want them to be, to showcase their profession. We want them they are professional, they are, esteemed people within the community. So get a microphone. They don't have to be expensive. So that's the first thing when it comes to the tech. Then we have to start thinking about the software, because, one of the things, and one of the other reasons that I'm so adamant that you switch your video camera on now from the beginning, if you're thinking about starting your podcast, is because even just editing a video podcast is so much easier than it was only less than 2 years ago. It was more difficult. Now, with the advent of AI and more software platforms coming on board, it's literally one click, right? So there are lots and lots of platforms out there. Riverside is kind of the most popular one at the moment that I can think of. Descript is another one that has come on board in the last few years that is very, very good. All of these platforms will allow you to edit your podcast literally with one click. So start to think about the software. Now, this is probably where you will need a little bit of investment as well, right? So you could get away with doing it free. I am, again, you'll learn my pet peeves during this just little chat. So my first pet peeve is Bluetooth. Second pet peeve is don't use Zoom, right? And I know we all know how to use Zoom, but if anyone's ever been on a Zoom video call, you'll know why I'm saying don't use Zoom. The audio quality is terrible. The video quality is terrible. And the way that Zoom operates is that, first of all, it applies very aggressive noise reduction to the audio. So what it tries to do is it tries to stop sounds coming from your environment. Like typically when people are on a Zoom call, I guarantee most people are typing away on their keyboard, right? Tapping away. They don't want people to hear that. So they kind of suppress all of that sound. Now that may sound good if you're in a business meeting, but for your podcast, you want the best sound possible. So that's one reason not to use Zoom. The second reason, which is the most important reason not to use Zoom, is that it's reliant upon the internet. So in a Zoom call, if your internet glitches or goes down, and we've all seen this happen, right? Someone starts talking like this, right? We've all seen that happen. That's going to be recorded in your episode. You can't get rid of that. Whereas platforms like Riverside, platforms like Descript, what they do is they record your audio and your video locally to your actual laptop. And for your guest, if you have a guest, you may not have a guest, that will be recorded to their laptop locally. So there's no interference with the internet, and then that will eventually be uploaded after the conversation is over. So go and look for some of these platforms, and there are free versions as well, right? So Riverside you can use for free. I think I can't remember how many hours you get per month. Descript you can use for free. So if you're just doing like one episode a month, right, if that's your cadence, you might be okay with the free version. So but depending on that, start to think about where you're gonna record your episode. Some podcast hosts, which we'll come to next, they also have recording facilities built into their platform. So I remember when we first used Anchor, which is now Spotify for podcasters, they had a really nice web interface, which was audio only, where you could just share a link with your guest and they could jump on and then you could record the audio that way as well. So there's lots of different ways you can do it. And by the way, I am talking really about remote recordings, right? I'm not getting into the nitty-gritty of in-person studio recordings. That's kind of a whole different ballgame, which we can maybe talk about another time. But we're talking about remote recordings here rather than in-person. So microphone, number one investment, use your laptop, and then think about where you're going to actually record your episode. And then that kind of leads into the other piece of software that you will need, which is your host. Right, so where your podcast lives. So what is a podcast host? Well, as podcast is an audio first medium, we've kind of been talking about this earlier, you want your podcast to go out onto as many different podcast listening apps, and there's hundreds out there. There's so many of them out there. But obviously the main ones, as we know, are Apple Podcasts. Spotify is now a very popular one. Google Podcasts, there's Stitcher, there's Pocket Cast, there's loads of them. So what you don't want to be doing is uploading your episode individually to each one of those. So your podcast host is where your RSS feed, which is what effectively, how they all recognize what your podcast is. Your podcast host is where you would upload your audio file, and that host will then distribute your episode to all of these different podcast directories, as they're called. And that, again, depending on which way you go, may or may not cost you money. There are free versions out there. Again, think long term here, right? I think if you're going to start this and you want to kind of be in it for the long term, which I think you do, then I think it's definitely worth investing in a paid podcast host, because there's certain features that you will get with a paid podcast host, which you'll probably want later on, or you may even need off the bat, like things like dynamic ad insertion and various other tools that are available, that if you don't choose wisely now, then it's not that it's difficult to migrate later. But for example, we've gone with the free podcast provider host from the beginning. Now we're 4 years in and we're thinking of migrating. One of the downsides of that is we're going to lose 4 years worth of analytics. Right, so when you migrate, you don't take your analytics with you. So all of your history, all of the downloads that you've had, all of the numbers that you've got, of course, you could just make a record of them, but they don't migrate over. So I would say choose wisely. Of course, Todd, you've got a special offer for people with your partnership with Podbean. I think maybe this would be a good time to talk about that.
Yeah, we do have a special promotion through Podbean. They're going to give any of our people that sign up with it 3 months to start off for free. Podbean's been a wonderful company to work with. I did not enjoy switching. At the time, it was 38 podcasts from one host to the other. So it's switching. A host is not a fun thing to do, and as you said, there's a lot of analytics that kind of come with your host. I still keep a subscription to our previous host, which is Omni Studio. So it's almost like a backup host for us. So I do have all of our legacy. I think it's 1.8 million downloads from just that one host that is still trending, and we're still pulling for some of our metrics that we're gathering. Actually, I'm in the realm of finding some investors, so they want to know, hey, what have you been doing for the last 16 years? So we're definitely using some of our legacy stats to gather those reports. But your hosting platform is pretty important. Don't go for just free all the time. When you're, maybe in starting out, that's great. But if you're really starting to get serious in it, spend $5 or $7 or $12 or whatever it is, $15 a month to host your podcast. And like I said, we use Podbean, and I'm going to be sharing codes with you throughout this entire, and I can't even remember what the code is. Shame on me. I think it's Podbean 10 or something like that. But regardless, when we have the 3rd episode come out, I'm gonna wrap all 3 of these episodes up, and we're gonna have an entire kit for you, which is gonna include a direct connection to Behind the Mic as well, which is the place to go to really understand how to start your podcast. And there's a place you can put your email in and get engaged with Sunjay and Anisha and through Behind the Mic. But thanks for mentioning that, because Podbean's been really good to us. Just to give you an idea, Podbean's the best thing about Podbean, in my opinion, because a lot of the hosts are the same with regards to what they do with RSS feeds. The number one thing that I love about Podbean is their customer service. Their customer service gets back to me in the same day, sometimes within the hour, of a question that I have or something that's really important. And I don't reach out to them for just anything. I'm usually reaching out to them for pretty important things, but they're absolutely wonderful. And I've used 4 hosting providers, so I can give testimony to, the best and the worst of all 4 of them. And I just think that Podbean doesn't have the best environment for a network per se. I think Omni Studio is wonderful for networks. But the overall, when I started shaking it all down, that's why we chose Podbean.
Awesome. Just the last thing I want to say about kind of software is that you want to have somewhere where your podcast will live. So your host may be the solution here. And what I mean by that is a website, right? Because one of the things that you of course want in this day and age is to be discoverable. And just putting your podcast on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts and on Stitcher and all of these platforms, that's great, but it's not going to promote your podcast. So of course, search and Google search is where most people go. You want to make sure that your podcast is discoverable. So if you have your podcast living on a website, so you showed Anisha's website previously where we put every single episode there. You have your show notes, which kind of talk about what goes on in that episode. You want to make sure that it's SEO optimized so that, search engines can pick this up. You've got all the keywords, you've got your transcripts, you've got all of these things that are there. And again, going back to transcripts, this is just so much easier nowadays than it was back in the day. I remember there were companies charging hundreds of dollars to manually transcribe your podcast episodes, whereas now, again, it's a click of a button with AI. So make sure that you find somewhere. And a lot of the podcast hosts now will give you kind of a landing page where you can just share that link, and wherever you in your social media or with friends or family or whoever it is, you can say, here's my podcast, it lives here. And that page will have all the links to all the different podcast directories. So if anyone, whatever anyone's listening to, whether their favorite is Apple or whether their favorite is Google or whatever they listen to, they can go and find your show easily. But also it's discoverable via search. So if you have got, let's talk about the medical professionals or the pharmacy. If your content is about, asthma, if you're a specialist in asthma and you've got content around how to how to use an inhaler properly. If someone goes onto Google and searches how to use an asthma inhaler properly, and you've got that as an episode title, or that's in your show notes, your podcast will come up as one of the search results, right? Google are now indexing, or they have done for a long time, they're actually indexing podcasts that have this website presence in their search results. So it's free advertising effectively. So yeah, make sure you've got a place for it to live. If you're more fancy and you're more technically savvy and you want to build your own website, of course there are lots of, this is not sponsored, but there are places like Squarespace and Wix who make it easy for you to kind of create websites nowadays. So there's that route you can go. But again, if you want to keep it simple, you just use the podcast host, which will probably provide you with somewhere that you can use.
So I did find it. So for listeners, if you go to podbean.com/pharma90, so that's podbean.com/pharma90, that little extra pharma90 onto the URL, to the web address, will automatically give you your first 3 months for free. So if you do want to start a podcast, you want to try out Podbean, once again, that is podbean.com/PHARMA pharma90. So I'm glad I found it.
Amazing. 3 months as well. That's a good deal, by the way. You get 90 days free. That's And that's, if you're doing an episode, a couple of episodes a month, that's 2, 4, 6, that's like 6 to 10 episodes, depending on how many you're releasing. So
yeah,
good work.
I think that what it is there's so much competitiveness in podcasting right now. And I think that Podbean is really leveraging the subject matter expertise, and they're going to start going after networks. So I think that's one that we're getting a lot of attention, is because they're saying, hey, why go after just one podcast when you can go after an entire network of listeners? Something that Podbean keeps pressing us on is turning on our dynamic insertion of ads that they control. And I'm like, absolutely not. Like, I'm going to continue to control our ads, and all of the advertisements that you listen to on Pharmacy Podcast Network are purposeful. And everything that shows up there in an ad is, I've heard from my listeners, they don't mind custom ads because it's specific to pharmacy. So think about that. If you are starting a podcast and you get into the position of taking ads, I don't know, if you turn on the dynamic ads, you're going to get Geico commercials and insurance commercials and tire commercials and something that's very general. Maybe you want to customize your ads. And I'm not saying not to take ads. Of course, take the money. I'm always up for taking money. But maybe start thinking, how do I go out and get sponsors and ads that are very specific to what I do? And if you want to think about somebody doing that for you, that's the whole purpose of joining the Pharmacy Podcast Network. And we would gladly work with you to do that. So that's for the more advanced podcaster. The first place to start is going to Behind the Mic and being able to, and we'll have this link in the show notes, but if you Google Behind the Mic, ANISHA, SUNJAY, this comes right up. And go put your email address in, or reach out to SUNJAY, or reach out to ANISHA on LinkedIn, and just get started. But don't wait, because it's podcasting is becoming so popular. There's going to be more and more out there. But start your podcast, get going, and talk about your passion and what you are into. And SUNJAY and ANISHA will help you out. It's good fun. All right.
Sure.
Got to wrap us up, ANISHA. What do you want to say? What's coming up for episode 3?
Ooh, episode 3. We're just going to get into the whole nitty gritty on how you're actually going to do it. What's your cadence going to be like? Are you choosing audio versus video? And then how do you actually edit and kind of publish the episodes? And then my favorite bit is all the social media, the marketing, the publishing, email newsletters, like building your audience. Yeah, that's all the good stuff that's coming.
All right. Well, we're excited about this. We're excited. We want to help you. Please let us know if there's anything that we can do. Reach out to Pharmacy Podcast Network. Reach out to ANISHA. Reach out to SUNJAY. If you're not linked up with them on LinkedIn, please go to one of those platforms and do so. But I'm just like you, SUNJAY. LinkedIn's my favorite. So I love it because it's all professional. All right. We'll see you next time on This Week in Pharmacy. We'll be talking about how to start your podcast in 2025. The best thing to do is just get started. See you later.
Bye.